One of the greatest concerns will be any kind of kidnapping. Kidnapping makes it far harder to be able to negotiate release or to retaliate with any kind of military power.
The Houthis can't be allowed to hold the Red Sea hostage. That's what I'm very concerned about.
The Houthis are using an increasing sophistication of weaponry. Therefore, that means that having a security force on those vessels, on those shipping vessels going through the Red Sea, will not necessarily prevent those attacks. It would require a military level of support in order to do so. We know that the Houthis are supported by Iran, and Iran is providing them with more and more sophisticated weaponry, which only means that there is going to be darker times ahead.
The Houthis have announced that they are not, or they've announced to us at least, that they don't want to fight anymore. They just don't want to fight. And we will honor that. And we will stop the bombings.
Donald Trump's Operation Rough Rider was highly successful at dissuading the Houthis from attacking US vessels. However, Trump is also an ally with Saudi Arabia. US has been an ally of Saudi Arabia for many, many years, as has the UK, as have many other countries. So it's a collaborative effort to try and prevent the Houthis from having their capability, and ideally led by intelligence-based operations, trying to stem and disrupt the supply chain of weaponry down to the Houthis, which is enabling them to continue to do these attacks.
I think the U.S. strikes on the Houthis up until the ceasefire definitely eroded Houthi capabilities. It denied them of resources and weaponry, but that did not obviously affect their will to continue to strike in the maritime sector. And that was always, in my view, a temporary pause, that ceasefire between the U.S. and the Houthis. In retrospect, I think that we are sending a very bad message to the Houthis with the U.S. and Europe seemingly MIA from these terrible situations and attacks that have occurred over the last week, with the sinking of these ships and the crew in jeopardy, crew being killed. These are also some European nationals are on these ships in the form of crew. I think that there was a Greek national as a part of one of the crew, and there were Greek-owned or operated ships that were implicated in these attacks, and that forms a real challenge to European Union interests in the region. So with the European Union and European allies seemingly MIA in these strikes, that really sends a terrible message to the Houthis that the benefits of undertaking this activity outweigh the costs, which are non-existent. And that, I think, is short-sighted because, if the Houthis don't attack U.S. ships, that means everything's going to be okay. Or that if the Houthis don't attack European ships, that means everything's going to be okay. It doesn't work like that in the real world. It affects global supply chains. It affects the global economy.
There have been a number of different ways the Houthis have been targeting many of these ships going through the Red Sea, and particularly at this pinch point where they control the vast majority of the ports in Yemen. And we've seen the sophistication increasing. And on the most recent attacks, these two vessels in the last week, they claimed that they utilized cruise missiles, but we know that they've been increasingly using drones to deliver explosive packages to these ships. And that is very, very difficult for these ships to avoid and to evade. You can imagine with a container ship, it takes an awful lot to try and steer out of danger. So they're pretty much sitting targets as they sail through at a reasonably low speed. The Houthis are also using small vessels, similar to what we've seen historically with the Somali pirates, for example, who've tried to hijack various container ships that have sailed close to their shores. And we will see an evolution, no doubt, of not only smaller vessels, but what they call mother vessels to deliver those explosive packages, or even increase their targeting for kidnapping, which then takes this entire situation onto an entirely different platform where, particularly with the crews, those crews can be used to barter and leverage not only the Houthis' aims, but very much those of its taskmasters in Iran.
Iran is very much in the background here and is absolutely part of this story. And any kind of response has to also include Iran in the picture. Unless there is a concerted air power operation to degrade the Houthis, coupled with a ground operation, mostly in the form of the Southern Transition Council and other Yemeni forces that are on the ground that would want to oust the Houthis from power, the Houthis are going to remain a force. And so there needs to be a comprehensive strategy that seeks to curtail and really, I think the Houthis cannot be allowed to control Yemen like in the way they are doing, because it can't hold international waterways hostage like this, and the risks are just too great. And so I think the U.S. and its allies need to really rethink their strategy with respect to Yemen. Many of the assumptions that were undergirding, especially the Biden administration's attempts to create some kind of ceasefire with the Houthis and modus vivendi with them, I don't think that's going to work. The Houthis are a destabilizing actor, and they're going to continue their destabilizing force regardless of what happens in Gaza and regardless of what happens between the U.S. and Iran on the nuclear file and other matters. The Houthis are a force there, and I think that it's a fact on the ground that the U.S. is going to have to deal with, whether it likes it or not. Russia and China are watching how the U.S. defends its interests in the Red Sea, and so I think that the message that this is sending not only to the Houthis, but also Russia and China is very problematic as well.
The Red Sea is a particularly important shipping route as it connects the Indian Ocean and the Asian markets to Europe and particularly to the Mediterranean Sea. And this results in approximately 15% of global shipping and 33% of container shipping for the world. Now, where this is particularly concerning is that with this increase of attacks, this is increasing obviously shipping costs, certainly for global supply management. And some of the product that is moving through the Red Sea includes oil, gas, and other important supplies to the European and especially the UK market. Now, with the number of ships going through, which approximate to about 20 to 40 ships per day, the number of ships that are being attacked, albeit are still quite low, we will see no doubt an increase as the aggressions from Iran are supporting the Houthis in their actions. Yemen is based at the foot of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has had a constant battle with Yemen, primarily also with the Houthis. And the Houthis are the predominant terrorist force and group that are trying to impose Sharia law and Shia law into the country. There is very little democracy that is present in the Yemen, and ultimately they are also supported by Iran, who are trying to further their own aims, particularly within the region. But where Yemen is located, it creates a greater level of volatility, since certainly the Houthis were formed in the early 90s. And as a group, they are very determined, very aggressive, and ultimately will side with Iran and with Iran's partners in any actions that they undertake. As these attacks continue, this no doubt will start impacting further and repercussioning to the costs of everyday goods that will be being brought through the Red Sea conventionally. The only other option that is available is through the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of South Africa. However, that is a far, far longer journey for many of these goods, which need to be supplied almost in a just-in-time process to markets in Europe and the UK. Iran's capabilities, in terms of its strategic positioning, is very, very well placed in regards to what they are seeking to achieve. They are decentralizing many of their capabilities and using proxies like the Houthis, like Hamas, like the Taliban, Islamic State, and also Al-Qaeda, and utilizing their capabilities in various different countries to strike at US and other coalition assets wherever they possibly can. So where Iran is somewhat of an enclosed space, they have very, very long tentacles that they can stretch out through these proxies to further their aims. Iran wants to maintain its independence. It wants to, under the current regime, continue to prosper, to build its capabilities. But ultimately, they want to see the decimation of Israel, their long-rivaled foe. And they want to also extend their capability into various other countries, whether that be through direct targeting, through espionage, through coercion, kidnapping, extortion. These aren't just localized to the Middle East. These are threats that prevail further overseas and into our own countries and into the United States. In terms of what Iran's capability is and what their ultimate goal is, this is still somewhat unclear and is constantly changing. But ultimately, they are trying to establish themselves as a superpower as best they possibly can. We've seen a escalation of support by Iran to the Houthis, who, as Iran will, they are the puppet master to many different terrorist groups across the Middle East, but especially in the wake of the US attacks against Iran and against their nuclear capabilities. So Iran is going to strike wherever it can. And this extends not only through the Houthis into the Red Sea, but also to the United States and to the United Kingdom and any ally that is seen to align with the United States and with Israel. The only things that ultimately the European Union, the UK, the US, the Saudis can do to potentially prevent these attacks will be a diversity of different elements. It's going to amplify the levels of aggression and hostility down there, but the Houthis will continue regardless. Sanctions will not work. Yemen has already been sanctioned. Houthis are already a proscribed terrorist group. So this will be a combination of both an aviation-based and maritime-based levels of countermeasures and attacks against Houthi capabilities, launch points, both for missiles, projectiles, drones, and even any kind of missiles that they may have their hands on.